The sun was setting behind me as I made my way down the long stretch of highway. The snow-covered roads stretched out endlessly in front of my rig, with nothing but a thick wall of trees on either side. It's something you get used to when you're a trucker, but tonight felt different. The air was heavy with something I couldn't quite put my finger on, an odd stillness that made my skin crawl. It was late, too late for most of the trucks, and I was pushing through the desolate Alaskan highway alone. Just me, the road, and the endless white stretch of winter. I'd been driving up here for years, through snowstorms, blizzards, freezing temperatures, but this night felt off. The whole damn world seemed to be holding its breath. I checked my mirrors. Nothing behind me. I could see the soft glow of my headlights cutting through the darkness ahead, but even that seemed to fade away into the vast nothingness. That's when I noticed it. A figure, small, standing off to the side of the road, just barely visible in the dim light. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the snow or my tired eyes. But then I saw it move. A tall figure, almost impossibly thin, dressed in a long, dark coat, their face obscured by shadows. They were standing just far enough off the road to make it hard to see them clearly, but I could tell they weren't moving. Not in the way someone would stand waiting for help. It was as though they were watching me. I slowed the truck, unsure if I should pull over. It was a dangerous place to stop, isolated, miles from any town. But something about that figure kept me glued to the road, my grip tightening on the wheel. Maybe I should have kept driving, but there was this instinct that tugged at me, a feeling deep in my gut that told me I had to know who or what that was. I rolled down my window a crack, the freezing air cutting through the cab. "Hey!" I called out, trying to sound calm, but my voice shook. "You need help?" No response. Just that eerie silence. I tried again, louder this time. "Hey, are you all right?" Still nothing. The figure didn't move. The cold seeped into my bones, and I felt a sense of dread build up inside me. Maybe it was the isolation getting to me, or maybe it was something else. Either way, I had to get moving. I hit the gas, quickly passing the figure, but the uneasy feeling didn't leave me. I kept glancing in the side mirror, watching for any movement. For a moment, I thought I saw them step closer to the road. But then, nothing. No shadow, no sign of life. Like they had vanished. I told myself it was nothing. Just a trick of the snow. But as I drove on, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I tried to shake the unease off, focusing on the road ahead. The truck's tires churned through the snow and the engine hummed steadily under the weight of the cold. But that figure, it wouldn't leave my mind. Who was that? Why were they standing out there, in the middle of nowhere, in a place so desolate? I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure trailing behind me, but the road was empty. Just the endless stretch of white and dark trees. Still, something didn't sit right. I couldn't quite explain it, but my gut was telling me I was being watched. As I pressed on, the storm started to pick up again. The wind howled, and snowflakes began swirling in the air, thickening to the point where I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. My headlights cut through the wall of white, but it felt like they were swallowed up by the storm. There was no turning back now. I passed a sign that read, "Welcome to Nome." It was a relief to see some sort of marker, but even that felt distant and foreign. Nome was still a few hours away, and the idea of reaching civilization seemed like a dream in this storm. I had been out here so long, in the middle of nowhere, with no one but the snow and the wind for company. That's when the radio crackled. I wasn't expecting anything. It had been dead silent for hours, just the hum of the engine and the wind outside. But then, through the static, I heard a voice. It was low, raspy, as if someone was whispering through the static just for me. "Help me," the voice said. "Please, help me." I froze. The hairs on my neck stood up and my grip on the steering wheel tightened. I was certain I hadn't heard that before. No one else had been on this frequency for miles. My eyes darted to the radio, but the voice was gone, replaced by nothing but static. I slammed the button to change the channel, hoping I had just imagined it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was real. Someone, somewhere, was out there, reaching out. I couldn't be sure if it was just the storm playing tricks on me, but I felt a creeping sense of dread crawling up my spine. I glanced back again, half expecting to see the figure again, standing there in the storm, watching me. But the road was empty. No sign of life. Only snow. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That's when the headlights caught something up ahead. It was another figure. This one wasn't standing like the first. This one was lying in the middle of the road. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what to do. Should I stop? It didn't make sense. Nobody in their right mind would be out here in the storm, lying in the road. I slowed down, trying to get a better look, but the figure wasn't moving. It looked like they were lifeless. I should have just driven past, ignored it, kept going. But I couldn't. Something about it felt too real, too urgent. I had to check. I pulled over slowly, the truck's tires screeching slightly against the snow. My fingers trembled as I reached for the door, the cold air blasting in as I stepped out. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked toward the figure, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The body was just ahead. As I got closer, I could make out the details. It was a man. He was pale, his eyes wide open in a state of shock, frozen in place. But then, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. His mouth was wide open as if he had been screaming, but no sound had come out. His hands were clutching at his chest as though trying to pull something off. I took another step closer. And that's when I saw it. Something had been carved into his chest. Deep, jagged cuts, shaped like words, as if someone had taken the time to slowly, methodically etch a message into his skin. I leaned in closer, my heart racing, trying to make sense of it. The blood had frozen in the cuts, but the message was still clear enough to read. Turn back. I froze, staring at the message carved into the man's chest. Turn back. It felt like the words were meant specifically for me, like some kind of twisted warning. My breath came out in sharp, shallow gasps, and I had to fight the urge to run. Everything in me screamed to get back in the truck, drive away, and never look back. But something kept me rooted to the spot. I crouched down beside the man, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. His eyes were wide, unblinking, but lifeless. It was like he'd been frozen in terror. His body caught in some moment of unspeakable fear. There was no sign of life. He was gone. But why had he been left like this? I pulled back, suddenly aware of the surrounding stillness. The deep, heavy silence that had taken over the highway. The wind had died down, and even the snow seemed to fall more gently now, as if the world itself had stopped to watch. My mind raced. I should call for help. But there was no phone signal out here. No one would be able to reach me for hours. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something else. There was something terribly wrong about this place. Something about the isolation, the emptiness, and now the body with that warning carved into it. I had to get out of here, but something kept me from running. Some sick curiosity. Some deep-seated fear that I might be the next one to end up out here, with no one to hear my screams. I stood up, my legs shaking beneath me, and took a hesitant step back toward the truck. My heart pounded in my chest, and the wind picked up again, whipping snow into my face. I glanced over my shoulder at the body one last time, half expecting it to be gone, to be replaced by something else. But it remained, frozen, lifeless, with the haunting message still burned into my mind. Just as I reached for the truck door, I heard it, a low guttural sound, a crackling noise, like something scraping across the snow. I whipped around, my heart leaping into my throat, but there was nothing. No movement, just the empty road and the body. I blinked, and for a split second I thought I saw something in the distance, just beyond the trees, shapes moving, shadows slipping between the snow-covered trunks. But they were gone before I could focus on them. I slammed the truck door shut, throwing the gear into drive. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I floored it, the truck's tires spinning on the snow as I pushed it to the limit. The headlights sliced through the storm, but everything ahead of me felt wrong. I didn't dare look back. The snow was starting to get heavier now, the visibility dropping even more, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread closing in on me. I could hear something, just barely above the roar of the wind. A faint sound, like a whisper, carried on the air. "Help me," the voice from the radio earlier. The same raspy plea for help echoing in my ears, now louder than ever. I glanced at the radio in panic, but it was silent. The static was gone. Still, the voice rang in my head. I wasn't alone out here. Not anymore. Suddenly, my headlights flashed on something up ahead. I slammed on the brakes. A figure, in the middle of the road. Not the same one from earlier. This one was different, taller, more imposing. The snow seemed to part around them like they were a force of nature, as if the storm itself was bending around their presence. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel them staring at me, their presence pulling me in, making it impossible to look away. My hands were shaking as I reached for the door handle. But before I could open it, I saw something that froze me in place. The figure reached up, slowly, deliberately, and removed something from their face. A mask, a human face, or at least what used to be one. It was twisted, almost melted, like it had been scraped off and replaced with something wrong. And then, through the storm, the voice came again. "Turn back before it's too late." I couldn't move. The figure stood there, in the middle of the road, its grotesque face now fully exposed in the headlights. The mask, if it even could be called that, was horrifying. It was made from what looked like human skin, stretched tight and slack in places, the eyes hollow and staring into my soul. I felt a cold, sickening wave of panic rush through me. My hands were frozen on the steering wheel, the truck idling in place as I stared at the thing ahead. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. The storm continued to howl around us, but in that moment, everything felt suffocatingly quiet. The only sound was the thudding of my own heartbeat in my ears. Then, as if the nightmare was only beginning, it took a step forward. I snapped out of my trance, my foot slamming onto the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires kicking up snow and ice as I tried to speed away. But the figure was still there, in the road, and as I got closer, I saw its arm raise, slowly, deliberately, as if it were motioning for me to stop. I wasn't going to stop. I couldn't stop. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, hoping that the truck could outrun whatever that thing was. But just as I neared it, something impossible happened. The figure lunged at my truck. It wasn't a quick movement. It was more like it just appeared. The thing seemed to glide, moving faster than any human should. I felt a sickening jolt as it slammed into the side of the truck, a violent, bone-shaking impact. I could hear the screech of metal on metal as I swerved violently, trying to regain control, but the thing didn't relent. It kept pace with the truck, moving alongside me, keeping up as if it was part of the storm itself. I had no choice but to speed up. My breath was coming in ragged bursts as I fought with the wheel, the truck skidding dangerously on the slick, snow-covered road. I looked to my side, and that's when I saw it. Its face inches from the window. The skin of its face was stretched tight, eyes wide open and unblinking. I could see the dark, deep pits where its nose should have been. Its mouth opened in a twisted, impossible smile. Its teeth jagged and broken, some missing entirely. It leaned in closer, pressing its face against the window with a wet, slapping sound. Couldn't scream. I couldn't do anything but push the pedal further to the floor. The truck's tires screamed in protest as the vehicle began to slip. I glanced in the rearview mirror, hoping to see the figure falling behind. But no. There it was again, still moving alongside me, its long, thin limbs unnaturally long, its body blending into the shadows of the storm. A sharp, piercing sound cut through the air. A screech, like nails on a chalkboard, coming from just outside my window. I dared to glance at it again. The thing was climbing the side of the truck. I panicked, hitting the brakes so hard I nearly flipped the rig, but it didn't matter. The figure was already on top. I could hear it scraping across the roof, dragging its grotesque body as if it were trying to get inside. The sound of its claws, if that's what they were, tapping against the metal made my stomach churn. I had to act fast. I couldn't keep this up. I threw the truck into a sharp turn, aiming to send it off the road. The truck slid sideways, tires screeching as it veered into a snowbank. But just as I thought I was free, I heard it again, a thud followed by a scraping noise. It was on the side of the truck. Again, as if the storm had given it an unnatural strength. I couldn't outrun it. No matter how fast I drove, it would be right there with me. I needed to get out. I needed to. A deafening crash echoed through the cabin as something shattered the passenger side window. I spun to the side, my heart leaping into my throat as the figure's long, spindly hand reached through the broken glass. Its fingers were too long, too thin, but it had a grip like steel, pulling itself closer with horrifying speed. I slammed the gear shift into reverse, jerking the truck backward in a desperate attempt to break free. But there was no escaping it. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the cold, piercing scream of that thing as it climbed into the cab, its breath hot on my face, the stench of decay filling the air. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was. My head was pounding, my vision blurred. It took a moment for my mind to catch up with the reality around me. I was still in the truck, slumped in the driver's seat. The air was freezing cold and the storm was still raging outside, but there was something different. The truck was no longer moving. I reached up to touch my head, feeling the wetness in my hair. Blood. But there was no pain. The cold was numbing it, making it almost bearable. I blinked hard, trying to focus, and that's when I noticed the silence. The storm was still there, but there was no more banging on the truck. No more scraping sounds. No figure. No movement. For a second, I thought it was gone, that maybe I had somehow escaped, but deep down, I knew better. I hadn't escaped. It had let me live. I pushed myself up, the cabin shaking slightly under my movements. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to stay calm. I glanced around the truck, looking for any signs of what had happened, but it was all so disorienting. The shattered window on the passenger side, the deep gouges on the metal. It was as if something had clawed at it from the outside. I couldn't remember how I'd gotten here, or how long I'd been out. I needed to get out. I needed to get back to the road, to safety. But the thought of facing whatever was out there made my stomach churn. The truck wouldn't start. I turned the key over and over, but the engine only sputtered. Damn it, I was stranded, alone, in the middle of nowhere. I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened the door, stepping out into the snow. The cold hit me like a slap, but I didn't care. I had to keep moving. I staggered away from the truck, looking around at the desolate landscape. The snow was so thick now that I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. My breath came out in ragged clouds, mixing with the swirling snowflakes. Everything looked dead. The silence was suffocating, like the world had gone mute. Then I heard it again. A faint sound, barely audible over the storm. Help me. I froze. It was the same voice, the one I'd heard on the radio, the one that had haunted my mind. But this time, it wasn't crackling through static. It was real. It was out there. I looked around, trying to pinpoint the source, but the snow was too thick, the world too distorted. The wind howled, and the voice came again, a guttural whisper, muffled by the storm. Help me, before it's too late. I should have been scared. I should have turned back, run, gotten away from whatever had caused all of this. But something in me, a terrible curiosity maybe, pulled me forward. I had to know. I had to understand what was happening. The voice had to be real, didn't it? It had to be connected to the figure, to the warning, to everything that had gone wrong. I stumbled through the snow, my boots sinking with each step. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to hold onto the fragile thread of sanity that was slipping through my fingers. The air felt heavier with each step, like the storm itself was pressing down on me. And then I saw it. In the distance, through the swirling snow, I saw movement. Figures. Not one, but several. They were coming closer. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no time to run. The figures were already too close, their silhouettes materializing in the blizzard. And that's when I realized what they were. More of them. The same figures. The same long, gaunt shapes. The same hollow eyes. They moved like shadows, shifting through the snow, their bodies twisting unnaturally as they approached. My mind screamed at me to turn back, to get back to the truck, to escape. But my legs wouldn't move. I stood frozen in place, my breath coming in jagged gasps. One of the figures stepped forward, its face emerging from the shadows. It was wearing the same mask, the same decayed, distorted human face, stretched tight and twisted. It opened its mouth, and I could hear the voice again. Turn back. You should have turned back. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by some invisible force. The figures were closing in, their faces warped in a nightmarish expression, their hands reaching out toward me. And then, everything went black again. I don't know how long I was out. Minutes, hours, time had lost its meaning. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the truck. The cold was unbearable, but there was no sign of the figures. No twisted faces staring at me from the snow. It was as if they had never been there. The only thing left was the storm, swirling outside, unrelenting. I sat up slowly, my body aching from the cold and the impact of whatever had knocked me out. My head throbbed, and my vision was still blurry. I wiped at my face, hoping to clear the fog in my mind, but everything felt wrong. I felt different, like something had changed inside me. I reached for the door handle, but before I could open it, I heard something, a faint sound, like a whisper, coming from outside the truck. The same voice. "Help me." I froze. It wasn't in my head this time. It was real. It was outside. I looked through the shattered passenger window, trying to spot where the voice was coming from, but the storm was too thick. But there was something else. In the reflection of the side mirror, I saw it. A figure standing just behind the truck. It was tall, its face obscured by the snow, but I could see the outline of its long, thin limbs and the way it swayed with the wind. I didn't need to see its face to know who it was. The thing from before. The thing that had chased me. I knew what it wanted. It wasn't just tormenting me. It was trying to pull me into whatever hell it came from. It wanted me to become one of them. I opened the door slowly, the wind cutting into me like knives. My boots sank into the deep snow as I stepped out, my breath visible in the freezing air. I couldn't hear the voice anymore, but I knew it was out there, watching, waiting. I stumbled forward, my body fighting the cold as I made my way through the snow. My heart raced, adrenaline rushing through my veins. I wasn't sure what I was doing. Part of me wanted to run to get as far away as possible, but another part of me, an irrational part, felt drawn to the place where the voice had come from. I pushed on, my legs feeling like lead as I waded through the thick snow. And then just ahead I saw it again. A small shape standing in the snow. It was a person. A man hunched over with his back to me. I couldn't tell who it was. His coat was covered in snow and his face was turned away. But I could feel the same unsettling presence I'd felt earlier. The same feeling of being watched, being pulled towards something terrible. I approached cautiously, every step heavier than the last, but as I got closer, I realized something. The man wasn't moving. He was frozen in place, like a statue, his back to me, his arms hanging limply at his sides. I reached out, hesitating for a moment, and then touched his shoulder. The man jerked violently, spinning around to face me. His face was twisted, his eyes wide open in terror, his mouth agape in a scream that never came. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. The man's face was covered in deep, jagged cuts, blood frozen in the wounds. And there, right across his forehead, were the same words I had seen carved into the body on the road. "Turn back." Before I could react, the man reached for me, his fingers cold and stiff. But there was no warmth, no life in his grasp. It was like he was just a shell, a puppet controlled by some unseen force. I tried to pull away, but it was too late. The ground beneath me began to crack, the snow splitting apart like it had been split by a knife. I looked down, horrified, as the earth itself seemed to open up, revealing a deep, dark chasm that stretched into an endless void. The man's grip tightened, dragging me closer to the edge. I fought back, kicking and screaming, but it was no use. I was being pulled in. That's when I realized the truth. The figures, the voices, the warnings, it wasn't just a nightmare. It was a trap. A way to lure people in, to pull them into whatever was hiding beneath the snow. This place, this stretch of road, it was cursed. The storm, the shadows, the figures, everything had been a part of it. And now I was part of it, too. With one last desperate scream, I tried to break free, but the pull was too strong. Everything went black again. I don't know how long I was unconscious, or if I was even truly asleep. The darkness seemed endless, oppressive, as if I had fallen into some void that had no beginning or end. My body felt weightless, but also heavy, like I was drowning in the blackness. I couldn't tell up from down, and every sound seemed muffled, distorted, as though the world around me was closing in. And then, as if someone had flipped a switch, the darkness broke. A sharp, blinding light cut through the void, and I gasped for air, as though I had been holding my breath for an eternity. But when I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the snow, no longer standing on the Alaskan highway. I was somewhere else. The air was thick with humidity, warm and suffocating. Felt wrong. The ground beneath me was soft, uneven mud, maybe. I reached down to touch it, but my hands brushed against something cold and smooth instead. Stone. Cold stone. I looked around, disoriented, and what I saw made my blood run cold. I was standing in a cavern, a massive underground chamber, so large I couldn't even begin to see the ceiling. The walls were covered in ancient markings, symbols I didn't recognize, and strange carvings that seemed to shift when I looked at them, as if they were alive. The air was thick with a smell of rot, like something had been decaying in this place for centuries. And then I heard it, a low guttural sound, like breathing. But it wasn't human. It was something far worse. I turned, my body freezing in place as I saw them, the figures. They were standing in the shadows, watching me. More of them. Hundreds, maybe thousands, their bodies twisted, warped, their faces hidden behind masks made of human flesh. They moved in unison, slowly, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of the cavern. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. I could feel them, each one of them, their presence pressing down on me like an unrelenting weight. A whisper broke through the air, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome to the place between." I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to stand tall. I had to get out. There had to be a way out. But the more I looked around, the more I realized there was no escape. The cavern stretched on endlessly and the figures were closing in. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Another figure stepped forward, and this time, I could see its face. Twisted, hollow eyes staring at me through the mask. Its skin stretched tight like it had been pulled over a skull. It reached out, its fingers long and bony, and the air around it seemed to shift, like the very space itself was bending under its influence. "Do you understand now?" The figure's voice was low, a rasping whisper that sent chills down my spine. "You are here because you are part of it. You always have been." My breath caught in my throat. What was it talking about? What did it mean, part of it? The figure stepped closer, its cold hand reaching for me, and as it did, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was like something was tearing through me, ripping through the very fabric of who I was. The pain was unbearable, but I couldn't scream, couldn't move. It was as if my body had been frozen in place, trapped by some invisible force. The voice whispered again, and this time I understood. "You are not just a traveler on this road. You are part of the storm. You were always meant to be here." And then it hit me. The Alaskan highway wasn't just a road. It wasn't just a stretch of snow and ice that connected places. It was a threshold, a boundary, a place where the living and the dead collided, where the storm served as a gateway to a place beyond comprehension. I wasn't the first to be caught in it. I wasn't the first to fall into this abyss. And I wouldn't be the last. With one final, terrible scream that didn't escape my lips, I felt myself being pulled into the void, into the never-ending darkness of the cavern. The figures were closing in, and I was powerless to stop them. The world around me was crumbling, the cavern collapsing under the weight of the storm that had brought me here. And then, there was nothing. I don't know how long I was trapped in that darkness. Time had lost all meaning. My body felt as though it no longer belonged to me, like I was nothing more than a wisp of a memory. I couldn't feel my fingers, my feet, my chest. There was only the weight of the storm pressing in from all sides. The deeper I fell into the void, the more the world above seemed to slip away. The Alaskan highway, the snow, the truck, none of it mattered anymore. Then I heard the voice again. "You're here now." It wasn't the same voice as before. It wasn't the distorted, pleading whisper that had filled the air. This voice was colder, sharper. It sounded older, as though it had been echoing through this place for centuries. It came from everywhere and nowhere, wrapping around me like the cold wind, its words seeping into my very soul. I tried to scream, to fight, but my body was no longer mine to command. "Why?" I forced out the word, my mouth dry, my voice cracking. "Why me? What do you want from me?" The shadows in the cavern seemed to move. The figures, hundreds of them, shifted, their forms blurring and merging as if they were part of the very air around me. The space stretched and warped like it was alive, breathing with an unnatural, relentless pulse. "You were always meant to be here," the voice replied. "The road calls to those who are chosen, those who wander too far, those who are broken." I felt something cold and sharp pierce through me, a presence, cold as ice, that seemed to drag me deeper into the abyss. Couldn't breathe. The walls around me were closing in, the figures pressing closer, their distorted faces staring at me with empty eyes. "Let go," the voice whispered. "Become one with the storm." I tried to resist, to push away whatever force was trying to claim me. But there was no fight left in me. The void was swallowing me whole, pulling me into an eternal darkness where the storm would never end, where the highway would never stop calling. And then, in that final moment, I understood. The storm had never been just a storm. It had always been the boundary between this world and the next. The highway was its tether, pulling in those who strayed too far, too deep. And the figures, those haunting faces in the snow, were the lost souls, the travelers who had met their end and had become part of the storm. They were part of me now. As the cold wrapped around me, suffocating me, I could feel myself becoming one with the void. My body, my thoughts, they were fading, slipping away like sand through an open hand. And then nothing. No more cold, no more figures, no more storm. Just an endless, suffocating silence. The road had claimed me,